We all know that our world is dominated by Western culture, technology, and values. We also know that this dominance only came to be due to the historical process of colonialism, where Europeans forcibly took resources and people from their colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas for their own enrichment. But what if the story was told differently? What if we were to turn back the clock and tell the story of what would have happened if colonization had never taken place? Let's find out. As most of you probably know, before colonization, there were many powerful indigenous empires and kingdoms such as the Kingdom of Kush, the Aztec Empire, the Inca Empire, the Kingdom of Congo, and many others. All of these states had one thing in common: they were run by indigenous populations. What would have happened if these states continued to exist and develop independently? For starters, the borders of Europe are completely redrawn with no European colonial borders existing. A small Italian city-state controls the Mediterranean Sea. The Byzantine Empire has reclaimed much of the Balkans. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth still exists, controlling vast tracts of Eastern Europe, and has an ongoing rivalry with the Russian Empire, which itself is locked in a constant struggle for power with the Ottoman Empire. The French and British kingdoms remain regional powers, while the Spanish and Portuguese kingdoms have reconquered Iberia and are vying for control of the Atlantic. But let's zoom in on Africa. Gone are the borders drawn by European colonial powers. Instead, we see a multitude of independent African states, each with their own unique characteristics. In East Africa, the Kingdom of Kush has managed to avoid the collapse that befell it in our timeline and remains a powerful force in the region. Its rulers, the Kushite dynasty, have successfully defended their empire from outside invaders and maintained their kingdom's prosperity. Their rivals, however, have fared less well. The Kingdom of Aksum fell to the Omotic people who established the Ethiopian Empire. The Somali and Omotic peoples form a loose confederation, keeping other potential threats to Kush at bay. Further south, the Zulu kingdom has risen to prominence, crushing the smaller kingdoms and chieftainships around them and becoming a major power in southern Africa. To the west, the Kingdom of Congo has become a major power, brokering trade between the growing number of European powers and the interior of Africa. However, in the north, the Songhai Empire has collapsed. While the area remains highly valuable due to its control over the trans-Saharan trade routes, numerous small states vie for control over the area. In West Africa, the Kanem Empire has expanded to become a major regional power, controlling vast tracts of land and wealth. Due to its control over the trans-Saharan trade routes, the empire's wealth and power has skyrocketed, turning the Sahel into one of the richest regions on Earth. Further west, the Mali Empire has also grown significantly, driven by the wealth from gold mining in the region. It has become a major player in the Western African game board. In Southeast Asia, the Srivijaya Empire continues to thrive due to its monopoly over the sea routes to China and India. The empire grows rapidly, amassing great wealth from taxing passing ships. The Majapahit Empire has grown to dominate the Indonesian island arc, while the Khmer Empire has fallen to the expanding Thai kingdoms. Further north, the Vietnamese and Chinese empires remain locked in a tense rivalry, while the Korean peninsula remains divided between the competing Korean kingdoms. Japan, however, has undergone significant change. Without the introduction of Western firearms, swords and bows and arrows remain the dominant forms of weaponry. This, combined with a lack of Western medicine, leads to an aging population and a sharp decline in the Japanese birth rate. Over time, this causes Japan's population to shrink dramatically, leading to a very different geopolitical situation in East Asia. In the Americas, the Aztec and Inca empires have reached their greatest extent, dominating Mesoamerica and the Andes respectively. Both empires are currently in a state of constant warfare, with neither side able to gain a decisive victory over the other. Further north, the Iroquois Confederacy dominates the region around the Great Lakes, while the Pueblo peoples dominate the southwest. The various tribes of North America remain largely unchanged and technologically primitive, lacking the metal tools and weapons of their Mesoamerican and Andean counterparts. In Oceania, the Maori and Polynesian kingdoms continue to expand, eventually conquering all of New Zealand and several of the nearby islands. Australia, however, remains largely unchanged, with the Aboriginal tribes continuing to thrive. Now let us fast forward to the 19th century and see how this alternate timeline has changed the world. First off, it should be noted that without colonialism, the racial hierarchies of our world simply don't exist. The racist beliefs that Europeans used to justify colonialism and slavery are virtually non-existent. At most, there may be some xenophobic sentiments towards Africans and Asians, but nothing like the racism that plagued the 19th and 20th centuries. The effects of the slave trade can still be felt in Africa, but nowhere near as profoundly as in our own timeline. Yes, millions of Africans have been sold into slavery, but nowhere near the 12 million that were shipped across the Atlantic in our own timeline. With a massive decrease in the demand for slaves, African kingdoms and chieftainships feel far less pressure to sell their people into slavery and are able to maintain larger populations. Still, the slave trade does have some effect on African society, causing massive population declines in certain areas and contributing to the formation of new ethnic groups. Without the slave trade and the triangular trade, there is little economic motivation for Europeans to cross the Atlantic. As such, the Americas remain relatively unexplored, with only the Spanish and Portuguese having any significant settlements. The French, British, Dutch and Russians are still trying to find practical ways to get to Asia. This means that the Bering Land Bridge theory, which posits that the first Americans came from Asia via the Bering Land Bridge, doesn't happen. The Americas remain isolated from the rest of the world and the native populations continue to develop independently. Without the Columbian exchange, Old World diseases spread much slower, meaning that the indigenous populations of the Americas have a much better chance of surviving. Smallpox, the bubonic plague and other Old World diseases do make it to the Americas, but not until much later. By then, the indigenous populations have had centuries to develop immunities to many of the Old World diseases, drastically reducing their impact. Without the population-destroying effects of Old World diseases and the slave trade, both the African and indigenous American populations grow exponentially. By the mid-19th century, Africa is home to 300 million people, with a significant portion of them living in urban areas. Similarly, the indigenous populations of the Americas have rebounded strongly and now number over 100 million. Languages of Africa, Asia, and the Americas begin to dominate global media and art. For example, Swahili becomes the dominant language of international diplomacy alongside French and German. In music, Bollywood films become massively popular worldwide. And Mexican and Brazilian music become dominant genres, replacing American and British music. By the 19th century, many of the local states in Africa have grown into powerful empires. The Kingdom of Kush, the Kanem Empire and the Mali Empire remain major players, while the Zulu and Congo kingdoms have risen to prominence. Africa is a continent of massive regional powers with no overarching power dominating the continent. This leads to a much different geopolitical situation when compared to our own timeline. Europe, despite being a relatively resource-rich continent, remains a regional power. There is no European colonial empire. The vast majority of the world's wealth is found in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, leading to a multipolar power balance. Europe is simply too weak to challenge the likes of the Kushite or Mali empires. While some indigenous states, like the Inca and Aztec, have dominated their regions, this has led to a stagnated development within their borders. In agriculture, for example, the Inca and Aztec empires have focused so much on military expansion that they haven't had time to focus on improving agricultural efficiency. In contrast, the Kingdom of Congo, who has avoided large-scale warfare, has seen massive improvements in agriculture and industry. They have a significant advantage over their neighbors due to their access to both the Atlantic Ocean and the riches of the interior of Africa. Due to a lack of European influence, industrialization occurs later and in many more places. Places like South Africa, Brazil, and India see the beginnings of industrialization due to the rapid growth of their local economies. With no colonization of Africa, there is no plantation monoculture, meaning that the environment is much more diverse and healthy. Large swaths of land are still covered in the natural forests that once dominated the continent. Deforestation isn't as rampant and biodiversity is higher than in our own timeline. The same can be said about the Americas and Asia. Without European colonization, there is no large-scale deforestation or mass extinctions of local wildlife. The ecosystems of the world are much healthier and more biodiverse. Without the wealth extracted from their colonies, Europe remains poor. Even with the start of industrialization, they simply can't compete with the wealth of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Global wealth distribution is much more even, with no continent or region dominating global wealth. Still, this doesn't mean that a new Cold War doesn't emerge. Rivalries still exist between the various regional powers. The Kingdom of Congo finds itself in a tense rivalry with the Kingdom of Kush and the Mali Empire. Meanwhile, the Aztec and Inca empires continue their centuries-long war. And in East Asia, the Chinese and Japanese empires remain locked in a struggle for dominance. So what would happen if colonization never occurred? Well, our world would be a very different place. The racial hierarchies and power imbalances that define our world today simply wouldn't exist. Africa would be a continent of major world powers, while the indigenous populations of the Americas would be thriving. Most importantly, however, is that Europe would be just another region of the world, not the dominant force it is in our timeline. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other content where I explore similar topics. Thank you for watching and have a great day.